Gaby, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We have tried to set this up for quite some time, so I'm absolutely honoured that you've managed to come to, and also our first podcast guest in our new studio.
What an honour.
So
it's amazing.
Chris and the new Klowt podcast studio. So I want to start with you founding your business. So you founded your business, as I understand it, during COVID when you were 25 years old. Talk Twenties. Obviously, we founded Klowt, we being me, and then the consequent team we've built around it in COVID as well. What drove you to want to go, I'm going to quit my safe job in the middle of the pandemic and start this crazy journey?
Probably a little bit of insanity from the outside, I guess. But yeah, I'd graduated from university into education, and my first port of call was teaching. I didn't love it, but like I knew from that kind of experience that I thought there was something really missing from adult life, that felt like we really had a big gap in life skills education. So whilst I was teaching, I was given a form of sixth form students, and they would ask me questions like, Miss, what's the difference between a credit card and a debit card? And I'm moving out for the first time. What do I even do? I've fallen out with my friends. How do I manage that? And it was just like all these different life things were happening to them. And they just had no one to talk to about it. And I was like, well, this is true for me. I was literally just out of university. All I'd had was the university experience. Don't ask me why they put me with sixth formers. But I just had that little bit of extra experience and just thought that there was a huge gap in the market. I didn't love teaching, so I did career pivot at that point, and this is where the idea like started to form for what I wanted Talk 20s to be. So before we put the pressed record, we were chatting a little bit about Klowt Show Live, which is an event that you've exhibited at and I went to for years as a kid and also worked at when I was at university. And this experience like never went out of my brain. I was like, this is such a cool event. It is amazing. I'd look forward to it every single year. For anyone who loves fashion, anyone who loves makeup and all that kind of stuff, I just found it like, it was like a whole new world. It was brilliant. So I loved that, and that kind of stayed with me. So I was like, I want to work in shows at the NEC, and I did it. I got a job doing that, except the shows were like additive manufacturing, 3D printing, plastics and stuff like that. So like I got the understanding of what an event looks like, but the subject matter to me, not to other people, but was pretty boring. So I was like, I want to marry the two together. I want a fun festival style event where we can marry the idea of Talk 20s, which is to help people learn life skills, this early adulthood, making new friends, all of that kind of stuff, with this in-person event. And I could see how it would make money, and I could see all those things because I'd obviously done it in my other job. That idea was great in theory, and then set out to kind of start making moves in that whilst I was in my events job, and then COVID hit. So I was like, well, I can't do that job. No events were happening. They weren't happening in the company I was working for. They certainly weren't happening because we were all in our homes. It all went digital. And I was like, okay, how do I still launch this company but digitally? How do I do it in a different way? Still the same mission. And I launched a podcast, and I think I was just a lot of people launched a podcast in COVID, but it just seemed to really take off. We started getting pictures from loads of PR agents and sending in, amazing guests to the podcast, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew from there. So yeah, the long and short of it is like we have scaled from the digital side, and we had to pivot and do the digital, and then now we're stepping back into that initial events idea, but that is basically my backstory.
You've done it totally opposite to what most other businesses is, which is they had their whole in-person infrastructure set up first and then had to pivot digital. I wonder, do you think that's given you any advantage in having been such a young founder, if you don't mind me saying? Like, you were 25 when you set the business up, and obviously digital first would have been your world, social media, like you probably would have grown up even in sixth form and going to university having had a lot of your lessons delivered digitally. Do you think that gave you an advantage when you entered the business world?
Definitely, and especially with our target audience that we are trying to speak to, they speak in digital language. So the fact that we can create content and speak to them in that kind of way, it makes sense, rather than like shoehorning content into stuff that we think people will want. We're actually really responsive. We track everything that we do. We're really like hot on like analytics and how we manage things, and kind of also experimenting with that, learning from the analytics and moving on from that. So we've taken like quite a strategic mindset to kind of the content that we do produce, but it's all coming from like a Gen Z kind of angle. And yeah,
I love that you brought up data, because I feel like I don't want to make this generational, but I really do think that a lot of sort of heads of departments, shall we say, of a certain age, look at younger generations and look at marketing and social and all these very new job functions, like, content creators, video. Like, no one really had these people in-house before. They were part of an agency, whereas now a lot of companies have these kind of roles in-house, right? Social media manager being one of them. But we look at those those roles, or people look at those roles as like these fluffy, like, oh, why would I want to be on social media? And they don't actually understand the data behind it. Like, that is why you sell online. That is why you push content online. That's why you build a brand online, is because you can track it. There is an ROI to that. You can't track necessarily the ROI that you receive from a billboard. I think Henry Ford said, I know that 50% of my marketing spend like gives an ROI, but I'm just not sure which 50% it is, because you can't, like, back then you literally didn't know where your ROI was coming from. How much time do you spend, like, given that you're a digital first business, looking at analytics, and what are the analytics that people are listening to this, and sorry to dive straight in, but I love talking about this kind of stuff. What analytics do you think business owners should be looking at in order to make sure that the stuff that they are putting out there is having an impact?
I think it should be a daily thing. I think that we pretty much look at our analytics on a daily rolling basis. We run reports for ourselves weekly and then for our partners monthly, but we're constantly checking over that kind of stuff. So we're looking at things like...
I was going to say, what are those things?
Yeah. So we're constantly looking at like engagement, follow account, likes, reshares are massive, especially on TikTok. The more reshares you get, often that's how viral a post can go. Email signups, clicks and links through emails, like all the standard stuff. We have just a huge report that we tap into every single week. That just means that we know that everything we're doing is informed, so we can stop doing the stuff that doesn't seem like it's getting results, and we can start doing more of the stuff that's having the impact. So yeah, we're really hot on it, and my team definitely use the data to move forwards with what we're doing.
I want to get into the marketing piece later on, because there's so many things I want to talk to you about, because I feel like you're, as you said before you started recording, the accidental marketer, and there's so many things I want to talk to you about. But I want to come back to Talk Twenties, which is obviously your business. You mentioned that the idea for the business came from when you were teaching and you were talking to, sixth formers about some of the challenges that they were facing. What was your journey like from, say, 13, 14 to that sort of age? What challenges did you have that potentially gave you that sort of, I guess, empathy for what those people were going through?
So I would probably say that my whole experience was I didn't know what I wanted to do in adult life. Like I literally it was really hard to look past that next hurdle of whatever school was. And even when it came to things like choosing subjects, I don't know about you, but I really, really struggled to like pick and choose and
it's
know
nuts
what
that they
direction.
ask people to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like you're told at the age of 16, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And the things that you pick now will impact what you do with the rest of your life. Like, what?
That used to stress
I don't
me
even
out
know
so
a bloody
much.
nail color I want to paint my nails. Like, least of all, like what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. That's just crazy.
Yeah. I found those decisions really hard. And so the whole time I just kept keeping my options open. And my parents also used to say to me, like, keep your options open, don't close off any doors. So I literally did that. So I think my GCSEs were all over the place. And I think my A levels were so random. They were like drama, French and psychology. And then in my AS, I'd done like maths. Like what a random bunch of subjects. But same. I was literally just like across the board, and a bit like, I've never been like especially good at like one specific thing. I'm just like all right at most things that I try, if I put energy into it. So it wasn't like I had a really specialist subject that I was like, yes, I'm going to do that when I'm grown up. I couldn't see that. So I would probably say that I just really, as that approaching adulthood kind of came about, I just started getting more and more and more stressed about, I don't know what I'm going to do in my life. And I even chose a subject at university that was from the outside was also very open and broad. It was basically an amalgamation of psychology, sociology, history, sociology. I don't know if I already said that. It was an amalgamation of all those subjects, and it was supposed to be called culture, citizens and education. And then the year that I joined, they just changed it to education. So from the outside looking in, it looked like I'd just gone to uni to train to be a teacher, but I'd actually picked a course that was, again, keeping my options open, I thought. Got to the end of uni, absolutely panicked. Like everyone else around me was thinking like, yeah, actually, I do actually want to go on and be a teacher. And I was just like, I don't know if I see myself doing that for the rest of my life. I just didn't know where that was, like whether I would fit in doing that. But decided to give it a go. You never know until you try. Did 2 years teaching French. In a secondary school. Obviously, it was an amazing experience, and I wouldn't say it was amazing, actually. I take it back. I'm glad I have the experience, but it was hard. It was really difficult, and I think forcing myself to do something that I knew didn't really feel right in the moment was really, really tricky. So growing up, like I felt, and that step out into adulthood, I felt really overwhelmed. Like I didn't really know what my next steps were. I also didn't know who to turn to. Like my parents could help me on some stuff, but they also couldn't help me on other things. And I think I was just craving to know that I wasn't the only person feeling that way, and what were the other people around me, like my peers, what were they doing to kind of not feel what I'm feeling, because I felt very alone in that.
It's funny that you said that you didn't know what you wanted to do, because I don't think there are very many 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are like, I know what I want to do. I certainly remember feeling like that. I think I sort of had ironically, actually, I wanted to be a presenter or a PR. I have a PR agency, and it's fucking hilarious. That's what I've ended up doing, because I ended up leaving university and was like, I don't want to do that. You have to sell yourself to the devil to be in a PR agency. And ironically, 12 years later, I'm running one, but but it's interesting that we're talking about it now, because even when some of the guys, and I know they won't mind me saying that I employ, they have a similar thing of like, well, I don't really know what my next step is. Yeah. And it's not necessarily from a place of like they don't have ambitions or they don't want to work hard. They have that bit. That bit's fine. We've got that sorted. It's like, what is the big picture? Like, what is my North Star? What is even possible? Yeah. And I do wonder sometimes that comes from a little bit from this culture of there are so many options now. Like when our parents were younger, like there were very limited career choices. You could be a doctor, a lawyer, shopkeeper, like whatever it was, but they were quite linear. Whereas now we can go on social media and be like, oh, I could be an influencer, I could be an actress, or I could be a video producer, I could be a JavaScript developer, I could be a Rust developer. Like the options and the choices, if you like, are so vast. It's a bit like have you ever been to a restaurant where the menu there's just so many things on the menu, and overwhelming. Like, I don't know what the hell I want to eat. Yeah. And I do feel like we're suffering that as a world right now, in that young people just don't know what they want to eat, because there are just so many options. And I feel like what you're doing is really powerful, because you're actually giving people not necessarily the tools, but perhaps even just their own torchlight to be like, right, actually, those are the things that I do really enjoy. Don't really like those kind of things. I really like that kind of stuff. Not really sure about that, without confusing the situation too much.
It's a mindset thing for sure. I think what comes to mind when you say all of that is like, we've always been told like the world is your oyster, and that is supposed to be a really empowering phrase. But I think it can also be a really overwhelming phrase to hear, because like the world is your oyster, so the world's my oyster. What should I be doing? And then you start doing this crazy thing which everyone does, which you start comparing yourself to your peers. You start pitting yourself up against other people. Like, they look happy. Should I be happy? Like, they're happy. Like, they like this job, but I don't really feel like I like this job. And is this right for me? And I think that also stems from the fact that like, throughout our whole lives, we've always sat pretty much the same exams as the person sat next to us. You're all kind of going for the same goal, and you're all getting benchmarked, and then you step out into adult life and all of that is gone. So it's like you're used and conditioned to constantly knowing where you are and being marked on stuff, and then you don't get marked on life. You just kind of have to do it for yourself, and also make yourself feel good about what you feel is success to you as well.
Do you think that school sets people up for failure then? Because we do very much tell people what to do and what to think at school, as opposed to how to think. And I know a lot of people will argue and say, that's nonsense. My kid, when I was at school, like, fine, that's your experience. But generally speaking, I think we can all agree that school exists to, yes, sure, give everyone education, but mainly to create workers, because that's what runs an economy. Do you think that kind of sets people up for failure in some way? Because then when they leave university, they've been told what to do for their whole life, and then all of a sudden they have to make a decision. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, well, this is exactly the kind of stuff and topics that I studied at university doing education. But essentially, our education system hasn't changed for centuries. Like, it looked the same when people were educating young people to work in warehouses once they hit 14, 15, maybe even younger at some stages. And that's why they all used to sit in rows, and they all used to basically get told the same thing. But now we realize there are so many more like creative minds and jobs, and I think the schools that do it best are the ones that encourage that creativity, reward that creativity. But that means that that means an education system where everything looks different. And I think
what would that look like, do you think, to you?
I just think
if you were Prime Minister, what would you do?
Oh my gosh,
if you were education
I would do so
secretary?
many things. I would first, Rishi Sunak, put personal finance on the agenda, not just maths. Like, personal finance needs to be taught until 18.
Pythagoras' theorem.
Yeah, that's like the first thing I would do. But I think it's more like it needs to be a more all-rounded education. Like, I think it's absolutely crazy that we would learn something in a classroom in like one day, and then 6 months later you're expected to regurgitate it onto a piece of paper in another room, like down the line. And I think that's really crazy when we have stuff like Google, and now we have stuff like AI that can do that kind of stuff for us. When you step out into the real world, how helpful is that knowledge? It is very helpful for some things, like being a doctor. Like, you obviously need to know a lot of different things, but for the majority of jobs, knowing that specific information isn't always relevant. So it is about kind of changing that school system, but they're underfunded. We do not have enough teachers. Teachers' workload is mental as it is.
It's so bureaucratic, isn't it? Like the red tape is just nuts.
Yeah, and I think an overhaul like this would be wild. It would change our whole world, but it's done the same in most places around the world. Like, so it's one of those things, and I think COVID coming in was an opportunity for people to kind of really open up to that. That was a huge change. A lot of things went digital for schools, a lot of teaching online, and that did change a lot of things. But it's still like there was like this kind of thing, we don't trust teachers and all of this kind of stuff. And Ofsted, I don't know if you've seen recently in the news, but it's been, the stress of Ofsted puts a lot of pressure on teachers and schools to continue in this kind of way, because one of the schools I worked in really just honestly felt like a grade factory. Like it genuinely just felt like that. They had their outstanding Ofsted, and you couldn't have a conversation with a kid without talking about their MEGs, which is their minimum expected grade. And it really just disheartened me, because young people are more than just their minimum expected grade. The second school I worked in was a lot more different. It was much more of a community vibe, and more of what I would like to see. But with that, I guess, comes behaviour challenges, and it's difficult. So I just don't know. Have we got a magic wand that we can wave and fix it? I don't know. There's a lot of challenges there, but in some instances, I think it's really difficult for young people growing up, and then for some instances, I think it's easier. So,
It's funny because I think when you're a child at school, you don't realise quite the impact that your teachers have on you. You're just kind of go, I have to go to school, it's really annoying. And I mean, not everyone felt like that. I definitely felt like that. I hated school. To your point about everyone learning differently and needing different kind of approaches, I was that kid that always asked why, and because I asked why, got in trouble, and it was just like that whole classic, like, she talks too much kind of thing.
I feel like we're the same person.
I think so too. It's not surprising we both started running our own businesses, probably challenge authority too much. But when I then had my own children, so I've got two kids, I've got a son and a daughter. My son's starting school this year, and my daughter's been at school for 2 years. It was really eye-opening to me as to like the literal daily impact that teachers can have on their kids. And it really got me thinking about, well, actually, what did the impact that my teachers had on my education? Because I've always said I hated school, blah, blah, blah. And actually, I didn't hate school. Like my sixth form, there was one, I even have a tattoo on my ribcage that says Memento Mori. I'll have to shout out I'll have to go and find the old teacher's LinkedIn details or something and send him a clip of this. But he used to come into the classroom every single day and go, Memento Mori, and like this really like camp, like eccentric way. And that really, his just love of life, and he was an English lit teacher, his love of literature and love of life and love of books and love of teaching was just infectious. And I'd previously hated reading. I was very like not very good at writing, not very good at spelling. And I guess because previously, to your point about the minimum expected grades, had low grades, there was no incentive for me to want to do better. But his attitude towards teaching, albeit it was a private school and we had a tiny class size, there was like 7 of us in the class or something, so he could give that attention to us. But it changed my life. Like I'm obsessed with books now. I read a book a week. I'm always harping on at these guys to read more, and it's just been game changing. And I do wonder whether as a society we all talk about they're underfunded, teachers are underfunded, we need more funding, but what are we actually doing about it? Like what are we actually doing about it as parents, as part of the community, to go, hey MP, hey Rishi, sort your fucking shit out, because education is the second most important job in the world after being a parent. And I mean that quite literally. Like you are raising, whether you choose to have children or not, if you're raising the next generation of children, whether that's through an education system, whether that's through being a parent, that is the most important job in the world. And yet we expect these people to show up and teach our kids everything they need to know for 25 grand a year. It's like crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we need to give teachers more credit, and I think every teacher would love to be in a situation like your teacher was. Small class sizes, ability to kind of give off that passion in whatever way possible. But my reality was as a teacher, and it may be different for others, but I just felt super bogged down by the bureaucracy of it all, and just ticking these boxes and doing all this rather than actually being able to give across my passion for French, which was my chosen subject. I felt like I couldn't do that because of these expectations that were kind of placed. So that being said, there are still some amazing teachers out there, and ones that I know were under all this pressure and still managed to create amazing lessons and inspire so many people. So yeah, I just think I see it going too much in that direction and not the opposite. So.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think we could talk about that for the whole freaking podcast. I think like they're massively underfunded, but also massively undersupported, I think, by the community as well. So that leads me back onto, I kind of did a bit of a segue there, but I want to get back onto Talk 20s, which is obviously your business. You obviously talk to a lot of 20-year-olds. I mean, the whole business model is based on educating 20-year-olds on like the life lessons that those people in sixth form that you felt didn't have and needed educating on. What are some of the things that you see? You've already mentioned personal finance come up time and time again that you just feel like you're banging your head against the wall of like, why aren't we teaching people this? Like, personal finance is obvious one. Things to me, like, you know, I can't remember if we were recording or not. And you said, what's the difference between a debit card and a credit card? Yeah. Like, we had a session here where I paid our accountant to come in and give everyone like a mini tax kind of masterclass, if you like, about talking about pensions and all these kinds of things. And it was mind blowing for a lot of people because they didn't realize that actually having a credit score is really important. And actually, you can max out your pension and actually that's tax free. And also, you get a tax like kickback from the government and like all these things. So, what are some of the core things that you think people should be getting taught at school that they don't?
Well, we like to split all of our content into 4 key pillars, and I think each one of them is like equal to living a successful adult life. So the first one is, of course, like finance and money. There are so many areas of personal finance that is just, well, even like to be able to use it in business as well, especially from a tax perspective, to just understand the world. You really need to know this stuff and nobody teaches it to you. I've even had people come to me recently who are or have been on the podcast recently, who are accountants full-time in their job, and they didn't even really understand money. So they were doing business finances and they couldn't understand personal finance. Like, there really is a huge separation there that we're not teaching enough. Our second content pillar is career and business. There are so many opportunities out there, but like you say, we've already had that discussion. It's so overwhelming. People don't know their next steps. They also don't know their worth. They don't know how to navigate their first kind of jobs, like how to kind of approach new opportunities, the best ways to kind of get into your interviews, to progress up through companies. Like, that's really new for young people when they're stepping out into that. So we talk about that. Plus, if you want to launch your own business, then well-being and relationships is our third pillar. So much of everything that we do is tied to our health and our well-being, our mental health, our physical health. So we talk a lot about that on the podcast. And then relationships is obviously a huge one. Like, most of your time spent dating is like a lot of in your 20s. Like, loads of people are having all these different kind of challenges, and we just, again, don't openly talk about that enough. Then the last one that we believe is just as important as all the others is adventure and culture, or what we call our like fun pillar. And that's important because life is not just about finance, career and your well-being. It is also about having a good time. Like, we're here for a short time, not a long time. Like, we want to make sure that you are ultimately enjoying your life. There's a lot of platforms out there that just focus on finance and just focus on career, and we forget that like we are a whole person that we're trying to grow in this kind of world, and it would be crazy for us to completely ignore that. So those are like the 4 pillars that we find ourselves talking a lot, and there are so many different kind of subtopics that come underneath that. It's crazy.
I want to come back to that because I think there's some really important points that you raised there. One of the things that I think is really interesting about what you just said is the kind of business and careers piece, obviously, because I'm an employer but also running a business and stuff. What are some of the things that you think employers are doing wrong in their approach to hiring 20-year-olds? And the reason why I ask that is it's that old adage of time and time again we hear this generation complaining about this generation can't hire this generation thinks that, like, there's such a disconnect, right? You are the connect between employer and
there
employee.
is a disconnect, and I spoke about this like only yesterday with someone where they were saying, I just can't hire Gen Z. I just feel like they're so lazy, and I feel like they aren't resilient, and they just don't want to do things. And I just think it's a completely different mindset that you just don't really understand how they are thinking. And I think that's because we as a generation, I'm obviously completely just stereotyping here, but I just think that we're more, and from what we see, we're just more driven by fulfillment. So we want to feel that our jobs are fulfilling and make us happy. We're not just focused 100% just on paycheck. We also care about what our week looks like, because obviously we're giving across 5 out of 7 days of our week most of the time, and it's kind of like, well, we want that to go towards something that is usually positive in some kind of way, and that is kind of, I think, the mindset that is coming then through. But the argument back from that I got was like, well, yes, like I completely see that like people want fulfillment and stuff like that, but sometimes you just got to do a job because you just got to do a job, and that's absolutely true. There are jobs that might not feel more fulfilling than others. But as a whole, I think that is what the younger generation is more leaning towards from what we're seeing from our audience.
More meaningful work.
Absolutely.
I do think, though, if I can say, and again, this is not necessarily a stereotype in any capacity, but just as in my experience, and it's perhaps even not a generational thing. I think it's more of a societal thing at the minute. And I think it's come off the back of COVID in this market of it's candidate driven and no one can fucking hire. So all these salaries were just going fucking crazy because everyone was desperate to hire. Like I interviewed someone the other day who had 1 year's experience in marketing. I don't hire for experience, I hire from skills and value and value that person can bring. And their skill and value matched that of someone that had 1 year in marketing. And they wanted £35,000 a year. And to me, fine, ask for what you think you're worth, but there is a total misalignment there on what you think you're worth versus what the market says you're worth. And what I mean by that is, if you can only do X, Y, and Z, but you're asking for an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like all the way down to Z salary, there's a disconnect there. So I feel like there needs to be an education on both sides of the fence of, okay, 100%. Cool. People that you're hiring don't want to work for you because you're trying to manage them like it's the 1990s and the 1980s. Wolf of Wall Street, we love it. That's my vibe. I get it. This isn't their vibe. So I try and not bring as much of the bullpen into Klowt as I would like to, because that's how I like to do things. That's not how my team necessarily likes to do things. However, I think there needs to be a conversation on the other side also, which is like, okay, you want meaningful work, great. You want, all these things, great. Happy to give that to you. But also, let's be realistic. And I don't really know whether employers or employees know how to have that conversation.
Also, I think it's there's that all other discussion on LinkedIn where it's like, we don't actually really know what is the threshold of what you should really be asking for. Like maybe that's a piece Talk 20 should do. Like what industry do you work in? What's your job role? How many years experience? And what should you be roughly expecting? Where do you live in the UK? I think that piece of research needs to be done and shared, because also people are going blind into these conversations and they're just going, well, I think 35k would do it for me. But they don't really know, like, unless they've got other people to go off. I think that's another thing, is that like being more open with your with the people that surround you about their salaries. It kind of gives you an understanding, okay, well, I can bench myself against them because we're either like in the same boat or they've been doing it a bit longer or a bit shorter. And I think that's what we try and do, is open up those honest conversations, because there is this whole thing on LinkedIn right now. It's like, should I, from an employer's perspective, should I list the like brackets of like salary and stuff like that? And young people really want that, because they don't want to waste their time applying for something if it's not within what they need. But at the same time, like, I understand on the flip side why an employer would go, well, actually, like, that might close off some people who might be relevant and not, and also it might mean that people ask for the really, really top end of the bracket when actually they should only be offered the other end. So I can see it from both sides, and I think that's why there's this constant juggle. And I think there's another juggle that I feel like is like a chicken and an egg scenario between employer and this generation, and that is that of trying to. A lot of people say that young people job hop way too much, and that is quite like an overwhelming thing. So for a lot of employers, they'll be like, well, I don't want to invest in this young person because there's a really high chance they're going to leave in like 2 years. So it's like chicken and egg. It's like, do I invest in this person and then they leave? But if I invest in this person, then they're probably going to grow and stay with the company and they're going to feel rewarded and they won't find other opportunity out there. And it is literally like chicken and egg. It's like, which do I do? And it can feel really hard, because most of the time young people just want to feel like they feel fulfilled, they feel rewarded for what they get, and they've got growth within that company. But sometimes from an employer side of things, it's like, well, I need to know that you're not going to leave, and I'm going to invest all this money into you, and you're not going to be like, bye, see ya. So yeah, another one. It's such a challenge to kind of fix.
It's an interesting thing to talk about, because I feel like I'm in a bit of a, and perhaps you are also in a bit of a unique situation in that I job hopped in my career, and that's why I'm sitting where I'm sitting. Exactly. Because all the skills that I collected during those various jobs I did, and to just full frank disclosure, about 5 of those years was with one company, but it was with 2 different roles. So, I got multiple skill sets. However, I do understand the cost association with hiring, and I think this is another conversation that people don't really understand. It's like I mentioned to someone the other day, we had someone join the company and I paid a recruiter to find that person. So that person had been paid a salary for a few months, which is, you know, fine. I think when people leave, you think, oh, it's just a salary. But it's not. It's also the tax I pay on that salary. It's the national insurance I pay on that salary. It's the benefits I had to pay for that person. Plus, it's the 10 grand recruitment fee I had to pay for that person. But so even though that person was only here for 3 months, they've actually cost me about 25 grand. And it's then the cost of replacing that person then becomes 25 grand. So
and retrain that person as well. That takes
100%.
time.
And also, like, billable hours, right? Like, I charge 5 grand a day. So if I'm training someone for 2 weeks, that's a lot of money. So I do understand it. However, I like to think about these things a little bit like dating, right? You wouldn't start dating someone and be like, you're going to marry me, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're going to marry me. And if you don't promise to marry me right now, we can't go any more dates, because it's just fucking unrealistic.
So true.
You might start dating this person, you've agreed to marry them, and all of a sudden you realize they're like, I don't know, eat their own ear wax or something. And you're just like, oh no, I can't do this.
But you've probably invested a little bit by that point.
Yes.
Somewhat.
Yeah,
you
have to.
You have to. Like,
and also, it's like you said, chicken and egg thing. The employee is investing in you, hopefully investing in you too.
Yeah.
And fine, they might leave. I say this to the guys all the time. I know one day you're probably going to leave. I know you're not going to be here forever.
Yeah.
But if I can give you the best opportunities and the best development and the best everything now, I expect you, to your minimum expectation of grades, I expect minimum from them to bring their best to work.
Yeah.
Because if I'm going to give you everything, you got to give me everything in return. That's how this needs to work. And if it's not that, you know, you don't want to do that, no worries, that's fine. You don't need to work it. That's cool. You can work somewhere else. No hard feelings. I'll give you a reference. All good. But if we're going to do this, we're going to do this properly. And I think, you know, back to your point about the chicken and egg thing, it has to be employers to take that step, because no employee, like, let's think about this in context of value, right? Who's got the most to lose here? It's the employee, really. Because if you're a business of a certain size, fine, you carry all the risk. You're the one that's kept paying everyone's mortgage, everyone's rent. Or, like, I see my wage bill every single month. It's terrifying. But my risk is less because I can hire someone else. That person, if they don't bring the best goods to the table and they lose their job as a result, that can change their whole life. So I think it needs to be the employers who are like the grown-ups in the situation, the secure attached in the dating scenario I gave, to be like, no, don't worry, I got you. Like, it's fine. Let's go down this road. I won't ask you to marry me yet. We'll see how we go. Let's move into
a good Gen Z employer.
Well, I don't know about good, but we're trying our best, I think, is the most important thing. And I'm not always going to get it right. Just like any employer is not always going to get it right, but you have to try, right? So what are some of the things that you think then employers are or should be doing to attract Gen Z talent? I'm talking like benefits. I'm talking, you know, employer branding. Like, what are people doing wrong, but also what could they be doing to attract those types of people and keep them, more importantly?
I think open conversation and dialogue between whoever is your manager and your employee is so important. Like regular check-ins and regular, you thought I was going to go for the pool table, didn't you? Straight up. Like,
no, I definitely didn't.
No. But that's what a lot of people think that's what you need
beanbag,
to. Yeah,
pool
beanbags.
table.
A lot of people think that's what you need to attract Gen Z talent. And I don't. I actually think it's much more of an open dialogue and an actual real understanding of that individual. We are all unique. We are all going on our own paths and really understanding what motivates that individual, how they work best, and therefore how can they work best in your business. And if you really fail to understand your employee, then that misalignment will continue, and eventually you'll start branching off in different ways, and they will kind of sneak off and start interviewing other places to try and find another role. Like that's just normal. And I think that open dialogue is so undervalued, and all the people around us that we see that are happy in their jobs, it's usually because they like and feel respected and supported by their manager or whoever's in their team. So what does that
look like then? What is this open dialogue like? Just practically, someone listening to this is going, okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gaby. Great advice. But what does that look like practically? What does an open dialogue look like in terms of, you know, what are the types of things you're talking about? How often should you be doing it? You know, what action should you take if there is rumblings of like something not being so great?
I think your employee needs to feel safe to be able to come to you when they have an issue or when they have a problem. But at the same time, you should be able to say back to them, have you got a solution that an outcome that you would like from this scenario? And that only comes from sitting down and having conversations like this. So your interview should not be the only time that you sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with your employee. That shouldn't be the only time they ever sit down and have a face-to-face about it. It should be regular. And I think some people leave it like 12 months before they do a review, 6 months, 3 months. I personally think that you need a real monthly, at least mini check-in, and then a 3-month proper review, like, okay, how are we doing on our KPIs, on our targets? How are you feeling, most importantly? How do you feel like this is going for the company? Like, where do you see your role fitting in? What do you think about your situation with everyone else? Can we support you in any other way? I think that is what an open dialogue looks like. And that's an hour out of your day as a manager, but I promise you it will save you in all those recruitment fees, in all of those kind of stresses that you have about that person, because they will feel like they're heard and able to communicate. And if someone does share with you something that they are not happy about, it's then about the next steps that you then take. And it might be that they aren't a right fit for your company and it isn't right for them, or it might be that there's something that you can solve really, really quickly and you just didn't know about it. And I think they need to be able to feel safe to be able to come to you. That's what a good manager looks like.
Yeah, and I can attest to that also. We don't necessarily do monthly ones. We do quarterly reviews where we look back, like it's pretty in depth. And the first question is, how are you?
Yeah.
Like, how are you doing? How's home life? How's work?
Yeah.
You know, the personal stuff. Have you hit your goals? You said you were going to do netball 3 times a week. Did you do it? Like,
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
stuff. But then we also obviously go into, like, you know, what goals did you set? Did you hit them? What went wrong? What went right? All that kind of stuff. You know, is everyone pulling their weight? Like, do you feel like you're picking up stuff you shouldn't be picking up? Like, all that type of stuff. But we do mini check-ins as well. And I know Sam's sitting in the room right now. He'll sit down with his team, like, almost daily, just have like a little 5 minutes, like, you were good, like, we good, workload's fine, like, you know what, life's good, dog's okay, like, you know. And I think there is a bit of a resistance to want to do that type of stuff, potentially for the reason of time, which you mentioned. But I also think there is if I can be honest, the main reason why a lot of employers are reluctant to do that is because when you ask things like, how are you, or could we do more, it opens up the floor for them to go, yeah, actually can.
Yeah.
And what I think people misunderstand about that question and the answer or the response that you get is you don't have to do what people are asking. But that's data that you otherwise wouldn't have had.
Exactly.
Our benefits, for example, used to be completely different. We used to have unlimited Amazon books. We used to have unlimited holiday. We used to have unlimited courses, and we paid subscription models for all these things, right? So it was costing us a lot of money. Obviously, you know, the unlimited holiday one not being a subscription model, but that's costing us cash because people go on holiday, right? But none of the team used it. And we wouldn't have worked that out had we not said, like, what would you like? And then someone was like, well, actually, it would be really cool if we could invest in, like, well-being and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So we now have Hika, which is a amazing platform. You know, anyone listening to this that's trying to work out what their benefit should be, Hika, awesome, love it. We pay £50 a month into this kind of credit, if you like. Hika as a platform is focused exclusively on well-being. So that could be mental well-being, physical well-being, financial well-being, career well-being. So they have things on there like career coaching, financial coaching, fertility treatment. They have gym memberships, Barry's boot camp, spa, facials, like whatever you want that pertains to your personal well-being, however you like to frame that, they will sort out for you. So we pay a £5 subscription to have that as an option, but then we put £45 credit in there for the team every single month. And for us, we would never have come across that had we not had that conversation in those one-to-ones. But more importantly, the team now love it.
And also, would they necessarily put that money themselves towards those things? Correct. So it's like money that's like specifically going on their well-being. Correct. That they think, oh, great, like I don't actually have to spend this, but it's like all banked and it's kind of thought of to benefit their well-being in whatever that feels like best for them. So
Correct.
yeah.
Actually, it's funny because I did a post about Hika and I got so many comments from people, why don't you just give your team a pay rise? And I was like, if I gave them a £45 pay rise per month, they wouldn't see any of that because it would go straight to tax. They might see £5 of that. So, like, what? And also, that's no guarantee that they would spend that on making themselves feel better and be better.
Definitely.
So why the fuck would I do that?
Yeah.
Like, anyway. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. What do you think people should be doing in terms of that? Like, you know, you said that open dialogue. You know, understanding what your employees want, need, you know, expect from you as an employer. What questions should you be asking yourself, but also candidates in interview, to make sure that they are the right fit as best as you possibly can, do you think?
What a question. Oh, this is a really good one. I think the standard, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years is so telling, because if it's not something that like looks remotely like your company, you can kind of guess where their brain and head is at. So if they're going to say like, oh, I think I'd really like to be traveling around Australia in like 5 years, but I actually like also really like marketing and I think this role would be really great. Like you it is really telling, and you kind of also have to probably scratch a little bit beneath the surface, because like people aren't stupid. They will probably give you the answer that you kind of want to hear. So I think it's kind of really looking at like what that person's goals look like, what their wants and needs and motivations are. Like what motivates you the most? Is it financial? Is it like clear targets? Is it opportunity to have time off? Like all these open things that you've kind of just spoken about with your employees, that you don't feel afraid to ask those questions in an interview. Yeah, it's right. Have you got the skills and the skill set? But you also want to know like their long-term fit for the company. Like what would you say are like your most important values? Like how do you feel about like obviously the standard things, how do you feel about the company, and where did you see us, where did you find us? That's also a really interesting one, because usually they'll wax, if they really love your company, they'll wax lyrical. If they've just seen it on the job description, it's like, oh, I saw it on the job description, I came here. But if they're a really big fan of what you do, and I'm sure you get that all the time with Klowt, they should be able to tell you a whole story of why they feel motivated to work for your company. So again, I think it's not being afraid to ask those sometimes more tricky questions much earlier on in the interview, and really getting to the bottom of their goals and ambitions.
We had a job application this week, actually. This guy had applied for 2 jobs and been rejected, as he even said politely both times. And he was like, I'm not going to give up. I really want to work for Klowt. So he brought us a gift and then had his CV in the gift and was like, now I've got your attention. Like, please consider me. So now we've like re-engaged him, because that attitude is so aligned to like what we're like as a business. So even though the skill set on paper, perhaps, CV, you can have someone whose CV is rubbish, and when you get them in front of you, you're like, holy shit, they're amazing. Just because you have a good CV doesn't mean that you're a good candidate. I've met plenty in my recruiter days, but also in my hiring days, plenty of people whose CVs look amazing who are just terrible in person. Anyone can download a CV template and wing it, right? Which leads me nicely onto my next question. Flipping it back the other way, for any 20-year-olds listening to this, or even 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, anyone interviewing, what are some things that they should be asking employers to make sure that their employer is going to give them the benefits? And I don't mean literally the benefits, but I mean the benefits of working with that business, like the career development, what should we be asking to make sure that we don't work for like toxic employers?
I think it's about having, again, like understanding, like, okay, how often will I interact with my manager? What does a typical day look like, or a typical week look like? And how will I be tracked against, my roles and my skills? Will it be reviewed every 3 months, every 6 months? And what does that kind of look like? What would my first 3 months look like in the company? What kind of targets do you think I will be set? What will be your expectation of me to get started? Because I think that really shows like a proactive mindset in terms of, I am ready to start. I want to know what the actions are, and I want to know what you're expecting of me in order for me to be able to go and do it. And then it gives them a real reality of like, okay, this is what this role would actually look like on the day-to-day. It's so hard sometimes to understand and what a whole company experience is going to be like from an hour's interview. Sometimes it's even over Zoom, and like initially it's really hard to grasp that. So asking those questions like, what does a typical day look like? What kind of KPIs am I going to have? Like, what's my expectation within the first 3 months are really, really solid questions for the company for sure.
One of my favorite questions, I had someone ask this to me the other day. I think they're like 19 and they just entered I get messages a lot of time from young people, which I fucking love. Like, it's the best thing ever when people who are like, at the start of their career go, well, can I have your advice on something? I'm like, yes, of course. Like, it's like way more fun than me doing my admin. Yeah. But they asked me, what are some questions, the question that I would ask you, what are some questions that I should be asking my, the company that I'm interviewing? And I said, the number one thing you should ask them is, when was the last time a top performer left, and what did you do about it? And she was like, oh my God, that's really interesting. And I think the reason why that question is so powerful is, one, they are never going to expect you to ask that question. Because why would you, right? It's all dandy and lovely. It's like you're in the honeymoon phase when you first interview with a company. They're going to give their best. You're going to give your best. Everyone's doing this bullshit production of like, I need to get a job and you want to hire me. So, we're all going to put our best outfits on. But if you ask them why a good performer left, puts them on the spot first of all. They have to be honest with you. And the second thing is, what did you do about it? Did you learn from it? Or are you just going to talk shit about them? And I think that tells you everything about an employer.
I love that.
I never forget when I first interviewed for a recruitment job, I asked a similar question, not quite as like well framed as that, but I asked a similar question to the person that was interviewing me. And they were like, oh yeah, we had this guy, he used to bill £1 million a year, but like he was a bit of a dick. And I was like, okay, so he left then, but like, so what happened next? And they were like, well, we just moved on. So I was like, okay, so your best performer left, and you're saying it's because he was a dick, and then you did nothing about it. Fine, that might be the truth of the story, but that doesn't sound like that's everything. And then obviously I didn't take the job because I was like, I don't want to work for an employer like that. So I think it's really important that you get both sides of the fence. Employers are going to want to interview you. They're not going to probably give you an opportunity to ask hard questions. Make them give you that opportunity. We dedicate 50% of our final stage interview to employees interviewing us as their next employer, because one, do you have any more questions for me is the worst way to invite questions from a candidate. And normally it's an afterthought from the employer, but also from the candidate. So they don't really have any time to think about the kind of questions they want to ask. But secondly, I get to judge you then on how curious you are. Yeah. How much research did you do? Are you going to ask things like, what's the culture like? Or are you going to be like, wait, what's your 5-year plan? Do you have an exit plan? Do you what does good look like for me? What do you need to see from me in the next 90 days? What are you going to do for me in the next, use that opportunity. And if you're getting an agenda for an interview, I think this is a really good thing for anyone to think about, is speak to the hiring manager or speak to the person interviewing and say, hey, can we just add another 15 minutes on the end of the interview just so I can ask you some questions? Because that totally changes the dynamic then. That positions you as someone who values themselves and will probably get a better offer in the end, because you're going into that with this like control energy of like, hey, you're interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing you. So you need to.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know that 35 grand person?
Yes.
Did they do that at the end of their interview?
No.
Would that have changed the way you felt about them if they had done that? No?
No. And the reason I'm strong on that answer is this person that asked for 35 grand was, their skill set was that of someone that I would expect during like an intern placement year. Right. And bearing in mind, Danielle, who's our marketing manager, one of the best in the game as far as I'm concerned. Like, she's grown all of our socials. She's built our website. She's fucking amazing at this stuff. She joined me as an intern, like part-time, and she was better than this person. Yeah. So of course I'm not trying to benchmark person to person. That's not how you should benchmark candidates, period, because everyone has a different type of value to bring. But when you stack up skills and you go, right, this person came to me on like an entry-level salary and they were here, and this person's coming to me on a 35 grand salary, which is like a management salary, and they're here. Is you asking me questions at the end of an interview going to change my mind about that? Probably not. But it probably would have piqued my interest a bit more about who is this person, because we've got to think about perception of value, right? I'm going to tell you into a little secret. Don't tell anyone.
She says on a podcast.
We do this thing internally, and I'm very open about it. It's not necessarily a secret, although I joke about it. When we first sign a client, for the first 3 months, we test them. We go, why should we represent you? Mm-hmm. We're looking at you. How opinionated are you? How, open to feedback are you? How good are you at communicating? How quick are you at communicating? Mm-hmm. I'm measuring you. Right? You're paying me, but I'm measuring you. And I want to know whether or not you're the kind of right fit for us, not the other way around. Because we've got plenty of clients who want to come and work with us. And when you position your services, whether that's you being an employee or you being an actual business, in that way, it completely changes the dynamic. And to our example of this 35 grand candidate, if they'd walked into that room and was like, why should I work for you? Perhaps it would have been a different conversation. But when you change that dynamic with someone and it goes from being a client supplier, a candidate employer, to this is a joint venture, let's have a proper adult discussion about it, your value immediately goes up. Because there's a respect level that you're demanding from people, whether you are selling a personal branding services or whether you're selling your marketing executive services. You walk into that room with confidence, people immediately think, you look and sound like you got your shit together. Yeah. People will pay you more because they want to pay people who've got their shit together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 100%. It's all perception.
It is, right?
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It's funny because the people that get paid the most are not normally the best at the job.
No.
They're just the ones that command the most respect. And it's the way that you show up. And it's so interesting because it is all personal branding. I think people think that personal branding is this big, shiny object. It's not. It's how you present yourself. Mm-hmm. Which leads me really nicely into your personal brand. Good segue.
Yeah.
You've done such an incredible job of PRing yourself. Like how, when, why? Why did it all start?
It's a great question. And I feel like I said it you mentioned at the beginning, like I'm an accidental marketer. Like I think everything that I do, it just comes kind of strangely instinctively. Like I try and be as honest and open about the company that I'm growing as I can online. I wouldn't say that I have it perfect or, that I'm doing it really, really well or whatever, but
I think you're doing it amazing.
Thank you. But I just think like if you go into spaces and you're authentic and you're vulnerable and you are open to be sometimes sometimes criticize, because let's face it, if you do anything online, people are going to have something to say about you. As soon as you like brush that to one side and get over yourself, like you will be okay. Like, and I just see like the more that I've put myself out there, the more goodness that has come back to me than bad. Like it's like 95% good and 5% rubbish. Do you know what I mean? Like, but that wouldn't even exist if I hadn't put myself out there. If I had to imagine my whole company, had I just been like behind a little computer and just not even put myself out there and been like, this is Talk 20s, but no one really know who the founder was or stuff like that, I don't think I would be doing it full time. I don't think I would have employees. I don't think I'm not even sure it would exist. Like, I really do think that like putting myself out there and explaining why I do that is so important, because telling my story, people can relate to it and they see the human in what we're building. It's a human company, like it has meaning behind it. And if I didn't attribute that to kind of my own story, then I'd be a hypocrite, I think.
And how do you get, like, I so agree with you with the upside downside, right? Like the upside of building your personal brand is opportunity, confidence, self-respect, like self-love. Also, really lovely byproduct of building a personal brand online, specifically I found, and I don't know if you can relate to this, is not needing to be validated by strangers, which I think is such a disease that we have. It's like, how many likes did I get? I could give two shits how many likes that I get now, but that's only because I post so much content that I've become immune to it, almost
desensitized.
Like
yeah.
And because it's a job, probably much like it is for you. Like social media for me is a job. I don't do it to play. It's not my go home and relax through TikTok. I only am on that platform when I have to make money, basically. So there's a huge upside, but then the downside is obviously, as you mentioned, you get criticized. How have you handled that? Because TikTok, we keep talking about, is savage. Like,
oh god, yeah.
Like I've had people stitch my stuff and call me like all kinds of names, just craziness. How do you handle that stuff?
I just think that, like, to be honest, any bad comment is engagement, like in some kind of way. So thank you for commenting. So yeah, I would say that at the beginning of launching Talk 20s, anyone said anything bad about it, that cut like a knife. I'd be like, oh gosh, and now I think like I have a completely different mindset on it, where I'm just like, yeah, that's just your opinion, your one opinion, but I have evidence of thousands of other people that would think differently, and also that some kind of conversation is really healthy as well. Like, we've just had a conversation. I'm certain we don't agree on every like single thing that we've had, but this is a healthy conversation, and we shouldn't shy away from having those kinds of conversations, because that's actually normal. If we all lived in a world where everyone agreed on everything, it would be weird. Like, we wouldn't learn anything. So I think that TikTok is just a platform where people feel very, very comfortable to share their thoughts, often because it's hidden behind user 451234567 whatever, or a cat picture, profile picture, whatever.
Or an alien.
Or an alien, yeah. So people feel a lot more comfortable to do that, and I think we should be celebrated. Of course, there are some comments that just aren't tolerated. You know, some of our guests sometimes will get like a hate comment and stuff, and we feel very protective of them. Like, if they've come on the podcast and they've shared their story, there's absolutely no reason why they should get hate. So we make sure that we kind of vet all those things and stuff like that. But open, honest discussion comments, I think it's just normal. I think that's where we live in society, and we have to be open to that, but not to take it to heart at the same time. Like, this is just one person's opinion. And yeah, you shouldn't let it kind of cut you too deep. I think one of my TikToks went viral, and it was all about the fact that I'd been in like a 9-year relationship and the things I'd learned in a 9-year relationship. And there was a few that was like, you've only been in one relationship, so how can you possibly like say this as advice? That haven't just been in one relationship, but they made that assumption from that video. That's cool. Someone else put like, he's cheating on you. I was like, good job, because you don't even know who he is. So like, a lot of these people are just there to try and get a reaction. I think it's about separating the ones that are there to try and get a reaction and provoke a reaction, or be the funny person in the comments and get, you know, followers and likes through that, and what their motivation is. Then there's the people who genuinely have an opinion and kind of want to share it with you, and you should be open to kind of hearing their side of things. And then there's the ones that just are absolutely nasty and should just get in the bin.
I love that you put it into those three, because I used to think about things like that as well. So I'm like, people that disagree with you are great.
Yeah.
Because that's the number one question I always get. Like, when I do like personal branding strategies with clients, or I go in and do these workshops, they're like, well, what do we do when people leave us negative comments? I'm like, that's excellent. We love
feedback. It's feedback.
It's feedback, but also it's an opportunity opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
So some of my favorite comments that I get, particularly on LinkedIn, are the ones where like, actually, I don't agree with you and here's why.
Yeah.
I love those
Yeah.
because then it opens up this completely different dialogue about, you know, their perception and life experience versus my perception of life experience. And then someone else will go, well, actually, no, I don't agree with either of you because
That's much better than a, woo, you're smashing it comment.
Or know your shit. Like, to me, the woo, you're smashing it and know your shit is the same. It's just, it's not that I'm trying to discourage people from celebrating others. We should celebrate others. I think if someone is willing to put themselves out there, we should give them all the claps. Like, that takes balls, as you know and I know. It takes balls to do that. Great. But let's not be living in an echo chamber. Like, part of the reason why I love social media so much is it just keeps you humble. Like,
it really does.
Put your opinions out there with chest, but then accept that other people are going to have a different opinion to you. And look, there's loads of stuff that I say that a lot of people don't like. There's a lot of stuff that people say that I don't like. But I think having an intelligent, grown-up conversation about it is the best thing for everyone, because I learn something, you learn something. We could still agree to disagree. But we both learned something. That's surely the best outcome for everyone. And like I
had a similar comment on LinkedIn a little while back. I put a post out about like how going viral on TikTok has helped grow our podcast. And this guy was like a podcast expert or whatever. And he was like, I just like want to like leave my comment here to say that like, I don't actually think that this might have increased your downloads. Like, I'm not, that this isn't always the case. Going viral shouldn't be the only thing for podcasts. And I was like, no, absolutely. It shouldn't be the only like goal and ambition for podcasts. But let me tell you why it's been helpful to us. And let me tell you what I believe. And what I believe is that like, you need to see often a podcast or a clip or anything that you're going to buy or sell and invest in, you need to see something like the rule of thumb is like eight, nine times before you actually go and download that, right? If this is the first time they're seeing, if a viral post is the first time they're seeing our podcast, or it's the ninth time they're seeing our podcast, that's still valuable. Like, the fact that you're going viral and you're reaching, like, for example, in this situation, 4.4 million people, how can that ever be a bad thing for your podcast? Surely that is always a good thing, because 4.4 million are taking that each step in their journey. Either it's the first time, and yes, they're probably not going to go and download that episode straight away because it's the first time they've ever been introduced to us, but it might be the ninth for some people, and then they're like, oh my god, is this what Talk 20s podcast is about? Oh my god, I'm downloading that straight away. And then they're going to the platforms. But that still helps people across all of their journey. So yeah, not everyone is going to go and download the full episode from seeing that one little clip, but they might share it with a friend and do this and do that, and all of those touch points are valuable. So don't tell me that 4.4 million impressions isn't a good thing for a podcast or what you want to be happening. So yeah, it's an interesting comment that I know we've just said, like, diversity of thought is great. It is great, but comments like that, I get that all the time. It will be people who are quote unquote experts in whatever it is thing that I'm talking about, going, this is wrong because of X, Y, Z. And it's quite often, again, I don't want to mass generalize because it's not always, but it is quite often people who've been in that industry longer than I, and I would suspect that this person's been doing podcasts longer than you. Oh, 100%. Who feel threatened by your impact in what you're having. There's two people that come to mind for me, and I'm not going to give them the platform on the podcast, but who used to consistently comment on my shit, being like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And it's not because I was wrong. I was right for me. Might have been wrong for them, but I was right for me. It was because they didn't like the fact that I was new to the game and was saying something that was probably their secret sauce and charged for, and giving that away for free. They didn't like that. It was threatening. So, you know, diversity of thought is great, but also sometimes take things with a pinch of salt. Exactly. So, had so much to talk about already. I want to kind of go back into the business a little bit, because we've spoken about, like, you know, your personal brand and how incredible it's been, you know, so far. And you've had some amazing guests on your podcast, like Dominic McGregor. He's amazing. I saw Hannah Holland was on there as well, a good friend of mine. So she's amazing. She's just absolutely killing it. Like, every time I see her stories, I'm just like, oh, go girl, so proud of you. And it's so funny because we first met through a mutual friend at a barbecue. And her business, I think, was a few years old, and I just started Klowt. And we just had this, like, immediate, like, you do influencer shit, I do thought leader shit. And it's like, it's so nice to meet people who are, in many ways, very different to you, but also are on that same journey. Hence why we're here, right? Like, we're very different people, but we're on a similar journey. We're trying to grow something. We've both got big, scary goals that we're trying to hit. What advice, I guess, would you give to people listening to this who, you know, maybe perhaps your audience also, you know, want to start something big and scary, whether that's a business or
career pivot or whatever, what were some of the first steps that you took, and what some advice, if you look back, would you give to people in order to move forward with that big scary goal?
For me, surround yourself with good people who are on very similar journeys to you. Like, it should be like collaboration over competition all day. When someone is doing something that you love, tell them that you love what they do, because honestly, I've interviewed nearly 100 people for the Talk 20s podcast now, and I can safe to say that pretty much nearly all of them are like friends of the podcast now. They're supporters of the company and of the brand. Most of them, like, we're on WhatsApps at all different times of the day, and they've become an extension of like our company in a kind of weird way. They come like advocates and stuff like that, but not in like a we've asked you to do this kind of way. More just like, I believe in what you're growing, Gabs, and anything I can do to help. And likewise, like, I'm also like a big believer in like, give as much as you can, like support as much as you can. Like, I don't know if I should say this on the podcast, but we're like members of like a PR company sort of thing, and they each day they send out like journo requests for different, like a whole list of different things, and I read through them every single day to see if any are relevant for us. But quite often there are ones like the other day, Glamour were looking for like an eating disorder therapist, and then another day the Metro were looking for like a mindset a mind coach. And I literally copy and paste it, I send it to my friends, and then I screenshot what we do for journo requests when we have to do that. If they've never replied to a journo request before, I send them that, and then I send them a voice note and say, hey, I've just seen this, I think this would be perfect for you, this could be an opportunity for you to get into Glamour or Cosmo or Metro or Daily Mail. Like, here's what you need to do, but you need to be quick, like reply. And I actively encourage that kind of stuff, because I just think that, like, what an amazing opportunity for them. Like, why should we be like keeping all this kind of gatekeeping all this stuff to ourselves? So I think that's for me been crucial. And in the beginning of my journey, there were people who were like how I guess I am now, who were like that to me, and I was like, what's the catch? I genuinely thought, I was like, surely like it's like the whole business world, because you see it in like Devil Wears Prada and all this kind of stuff, it's like me versus you, and the only way that I can win is if you don't win. That's stupid. The way we all win is if everyone wins, like if we all are sharing these opportunities and stuff like that. So people started doing that to me in the early days, and I was like, this is actually really great, and I shouldn't feel overwhelmed or stressed or pressured by that. I should actually just celebrate it and just do it back. And it's created a really nice connection. And I don't think, like, we're about to launch something really new and really big, and because people get our story and because they know that it will be reciprocated, the actual act of launching this company is a million times easier than it was launching Talk 20s when it was just digital. Now we're going into events, and it's feeling a lot easier because people are there to support us. You know, have you spoken to this brand who might be worth exhibiting at TwentiesFest? Have you thought about this person for a speaker? I can intro you. Like, I spend a lot of my week just introing people that I know from different spaces and being like, you guys would be really great to connect.
That's literally what I do all day.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I think networking is such an underrated part of like getting ahead in your life.
100%.
And I don't mean that in a strategic way. I mean, literally, when you do good for other people, good just happens to come back to you. Because it's like that law of attraction piece. Like, you smile at people, they'll smile back at you. You do something good for someone, they'll do something good for you. And it's not because it's a transactional thing. It's because genuinely, the more you give out, the more you get back. Even on social media, the more engagement and love you give out, quite often the more you get back. And I just think, I do wonder sometimes whether because of social media or because, you know, we're also inward facing and we're told to like reflect and look at ourselves all the time, that we forget that actually there is a whole community of people around us, or there could be a community of people around us who could help us and that we could help. And I do think we've lost a sense of that a little bit. So I think that's such good advice. People like, get yourself a mentor, get yourself a community, become a mentor for other people, because that will impact their lives and also your lives indirectly in unimaginable ways. You've really introduced quite nicely there the TwentiesFest, which I would love to talk about if you would like to. So this is the festival that you're putting together, the in real life event, which is obviously what the business was originally founded on. So talk me through that. Like, what is the concept? Who is it for? Where can we find out more?
Absolutely. So TwentiesFest is for anyone in their 20s that feels a little bit lost and is looking for their next step.
Sure, that's everyone in their 20s.
Yeah, pretty much. So we're launching this event, and it is taking place in the north, because that's where we're originally from, but we hope to bring it to London every single year. Like, that's the whole plan. So we are kicking off in the north, and we're going to have loads of different brands who are there with like loads of different activations, but most importantly, we've got some really amazing content going on. So we've got 2 different stages where you can come to different workshops, the whatever stuff that you didn't get taught in school, we will cover, and we will not gatekeep, and it won't feel like you're going back to school, because it's a festival. So we'll have live music, DJs, food, drink, like whatever it is, you can come along with your friends. It's supposed to feel like a day out. Like the feeling I got at Klowt Show Live, which I was talking about at the beginning of that's what I want people to feel here, but they're also walking away with like a positive action to take in their life, whether that is starting investing for the first time because they've been to an investing workshop, or whether that is actually, I'm going to ditch that boy who's been treating me like trash because I listened to an amazing speaker talk to me about my worth and how I shouldn't accept this and stuff like that. I believe there's a festival for these types of conversations that literally says, you're just taking your first steps into adult life. Don't panic. It's going to be okay. Take something away from this event, enjoy it with your friends, and don't worry, take the pressure off yourself. It's going to be a little bit easier. So yeah, that's what I wanted the event to kind of feel like, and it's very quickly coming together, so it should be really exciting.
I love the idea of it, because when you were speaking about the 5 topics and the 5 pillars in your brand, like the fun bit was something that you really emphasized. To me, it sounds like you're making education fun.
Well, that is ultimately the end goal. Like, it sounds like a lot of people will go, oh, life skills is boring. Like, it feels like I'm going back to school. That is the last thing of what we want to feel like. I've literally been talking to someone on a brand on the train this morning right now who want to build a basketball court, like fully branded, like basketball court. And they're like a fashion company. So they want to like shoot you to win prizes, to shoot into this, and that's what it's going to feel like. Like, not every single brand activation will be basketball. Like, don't stress if you're like, I'm rubbish, I cannot shoot hoops, I don't even know if that's the right terminology to use. But like, it will feel fun. Like, you're not going there just to sit down and like, we've all seen it, like, come to this workshop and you'll learn about this, and it's literally just in a room, and it can just feel like, gosh, yeah, like this will be the most funnest event that will hopefully have a really big impact, or maybe even change your life.
And where can people find out more information about it?
So if you go to talk20s.com/20sfest, so we spell 20s, not the numbers, TWENTIES. So talk20s.com/20sfest, and you can pre-register there. We haven't got tickets out just for now because we're collecting as much data as we possibly can. So it's a little questionnaire for you to go through. It takes 2 minutes, and we want you to tell us what you want to see at 20sfest. So we want to know what topics you are struggling with, and that will be what we put on in terms of the workshops. Like, tell us what you need, we will provide. And so we want to keep the pre-reg open for as long as possible before we then text you all or email you all and tell you tickets are live. You can get them now. So yeah.
I think everyone needs advice on relationships. So I'll certainly be registering. Gaby, this has been such an enjoyable chat, and I feel like I could keep talking to you for so much longer, but I'm conscious of time. And there's one thing that I ask every single person that comes on this podcast is to kind of round this off, and I think it's a really nice way to end it, particularly given the subject matter that you're an expert in, which is 20s. If you could go back and tell your 21-year-old self 3 things, it could be advice, it could be support, it could be whatever, what would those 3 things be?
I think the most important one that I always come back to is like, trust your gut. It will never usually do you wrong. Like, there have been so many situations where I've gone, tried to talk myself into situations, starting teaching for one, was talking to investors last year about my company. Like, all of it didn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right, there's usually a reason why. So like, completely trust your gut. The second one would be like, massively about who you surround yourself with. Like, there are some friends that have stayed for the journey, but like, I fully believe that friends are there for like a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And it is really important to know who you surround yourself with. I've got very select few friends that have been with me throughout my whole life, but I have a lot of new ones, and they are just as important as the ones who've been there always. And then the last one, I would just try and say, like, going back to this idea of like fun, and that like life isn't supposed to just all be about your career, your finance, your well-being. Like, factor in some fun for yourself, because it's so important that we actually are here. Like I said, we're here for a short, fun, good time, not a long time. I think I said the phrase wrong earlier, but a good time, not a long time, and make sure that you enjoy yourself, most importantly.
Life is stressful, too stressful not to have some joy.
Exactly.
Gaby, thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Oh, thank you for having me.